I was born in Monterrey, Mexico in 1967. Well, I think like every child in Mexico, mostly outside, because we didn't have internet or anything like that. Television was not, I didn't watch television, so most of the time I would just be outside playing and of course going to school. Yeah, it was fun. I used to go in early in the morning. They had like two shifts, one from 8 to 12 and then the other one from 1 to I think 5. And so I used to go in the morning. And so I have the rest of the day just free, playing with the friends. I remember selling icicles with a little carrito, little cart, and that was about it. I didn't work. I used to wash like the store for some friends of my family, but that was it. No serious work like on the farm or anything like that. Well, my dad was born in the ranch, and so he used to work the land with my grandfather. Then, of course, he migrated to Monterrey, Mexico, to the big city, and then he started working in the restaurant industry. That's where he basically worked for the rest of his life, in the restaurant industry. My mom didn't go to school, same as my dad. Didn't really finish school. I think like third, fourth grade. And then my mom just basically just helped around the house with my grandmother. And then she also moved to Monterey, where she met my dad. Well, my dad came here he went to Houston to work in a restaurant. He didn't like the idea of him being undocumented. So he went back to Monterey, but he had already met the owner of the restaurants. And so the owner said, well, if you come and work for me, I'll try to get your papers. And so he did, then went back to Houston with a permit. And then from then they moved him to Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1972. And so from 72 until 78, when we got our paperwork, we came here on November of 1978. I asked myself the same thing, but when you're 11, you have not much of a choice. You just come and move with the rest of the family. It was me and my brothers and my mom that came to Oklahoma in November of 78. Like I said, my dad was already here working. Yeah, I started working. My brother and I, older brother, started working with dishwashers and busboy, at that age. He was, I think, 15 and I was 11, going to 12. And so we just started, basically just helping out my dad run the restaurant that he worked for. I mean, he has staff, but we were just like, helping. It wasn't like a paid job. People just give us, oh, here's $20, here's $10. Going back a little bit, when we moved over here, there weren't really any Hispanics, very few Hispanics. And so when I started going to school in 79, I was the only one of 2 Hispanics in middle school. And when I went to high school, I think there was about 6 of us, 6 Hispanics, which now in Tulsa Public Schools, I mean, we're the majority. But back then, there was just 3 of us, it was 6 of us total. And so basically, I didn't really have any Hispanic friends till later on the years. Most of my friends were, African American and white. And as I went through the years, when I got out of high school, I started getting involved because the Hispanic community is starting to, grow a little bit. And so they asked me to volunteer and go and translate to families that just been arriving in Tulsa. So 19 started getting involved, and I've been involved in the Hispanic community now for 38 years in Tulsa, Oklahoma. No, I did apply for a scholarship. I wanted to be a teacher because I used to work with students, and so when I applied, there were many teachers at that time helping me with the application, and I missed it, I believe, by 2, because I was going selecting only 15 people for that scholarship, and it was a full scholarship, and so you can be a teacher. I missed it too, and I just went to like Tulsa Community College, but I did not finish school whatsoever. I think when you start doing things and people ask you to help, you just get busy. You get busy on doing that, and in a way, you kind of tend to forget. And then other people try to push you, to bring you in on other activities. For example, there were several people talking to me about a Hispanic chamber, to start a Hispanic chamber in Tulsa. I didn't know what a Hispanic chamber, does or the importance in the community. And so I finally got those 2 people together, and then they formed a board of directors, me being one of them. So we became the founders of the Hispanic Chamber back in '98, I believe. And at that time, I was already busy working in the Hispanic community on doing several things, working with the Tulsa Public Schools, working with the city and trying to reach out that community, working with other entities, being volunteer in festivals. And so when the time came to be part of the Hispanic Chamber, I think that's when they first started noticing the fast-growing Hispanic population. And then the Hispanic Chamber became one of the leading organizations at that time to put a face on the Hispanic community. I think mostly with the permits and trying to get them to start their business on the right way, because people started just doing things without any licensing, and that's where the Hispanic Chamber played an important part at that time on trying to get their LLCs, their insurance. They were in a way they were not the mom and pop, Hispanic business, but they were a little bit above that, even though the lack of English would hinder them on trying to grow their business. So a lot of the businesses would focus just basically on the Hispanic market. There were some, because some very successful businesses, they get too busy, and then all of a sudden they're too busy making money or making their business more profitable, and they tend to forget the Hispanic community. They tend to forget whoever puts them there, and so that was my big struggle. I would help businesses try to cater to both communities. Basically, if you're a restaurant, basically you just kind of change the recipe. Don't make it too spicy so everybody can enjoy it. But then they didn't have time to get involved in the Hispanic community. So we would try to do events, and we tried to get them to sponsor some of those events. So that's in a way that was giving back to the community. And so, but that was a big struggle because they were so busy and they weren't contributing to the growth of the Hispanic community. And even today, there are many businesses that don't contribute to the growth of the Hispanic community, which I think is wrong. I think everybody should help out the needs of the community, especially a growing community. To be a role model for the young, and not to forget your roots, not to forget where we came from, because I think everybody had at one point in their lives was struggling, and so I think that struggle needs to be in here in order for you to appreciate the clients that you might have in the community. And I always tell them, I said, if you have a relative that passes away, or a daughter or a son that do an honor on his name and do a scholarship, things like little bitty things like that could help out the community. And the Hispanic community is so rich in culture and family values, but we're so poor in trying to help out the others. I think there needs to be more Hispanic businesses helping the Hispanic community in general. I think so. I mean, I look at some of the businesses that say, oh, I'm going to help my cousin out to help me run this restaurant, because instead of, okay, let's try to maybe put a group together of the community or the employees. I remember one time when we were in the Hispanic Chamber, we were doing the Small Business Academy, and by talking to some of the recruit students, talking to some of the businesses, I would say, why don't you send me some of your workers, so they can get educated on how to run a business, that maybe he could become a supervisor, and then he could, if he opens a business, he could become a provider or a client of yours. And they would say, oh, no, they're fine. They're fine like that. And I thought, how you expect your community to grow when you have people stopping that growth, and stopping that dream of those people, that they can grow in the United States. They can start a business and grow their business and grow their dreams. And so I saw that. To me, it was very disappointing to see the attitude of some of the businesses, that they didn't want their employees to be, somebody in the business world. Depending on how you look at it, I think in the Hispanic business, I mean, it is expensive in the corporate world to train employees, but in the mom and pop, it's really not. I mean, because you're training them to run a business on a day-to-day basis, and so I look at it that their investment they're making on training this person, they're making an investment in the community, because then this person that they're training might open a branch of this business, and then hire more employees and creating jobs. And so I think that only benefits everybody, the community especially. A franchise concept or opening another similar business, but not as competition. No, don't get me wrong. I think, for example, if I'm going to open a restaurant, all of a sudden I have another restaurant in front of me. Why? Why are you creating competition towards me? But I mean, that's the way of life here in the United States. If competition could be a healthy thing, but jealousy, opening a business on jealousy alone, it's not going to work, especially in the one that has the jealousy. Well, I've always been in the cultural side. Before I even started with the Hispanic Chamber, worked with the arts and humanities, Oklahoma Arts Council. Back in the days, I used to go to the schools teaching or showcasing the Mexican culture, the Latin American children music, and Mexico as I see it, a presentation of pictures. So I was already going to all over Northeast Oklahoma and even parts of Arkansas to some of the schools with my presentations. Did that for about 15 years, and then the chamber and other work in the community started popping up, and they asked me to be part of the Hispanic Chamber. And then in 2007, the position opened, and they asked me to apply, and I did, and I got the job. I think I honestly think that I got the job because the chamber was leading the organizations on giving representation to the Hispanic community. But the problem was that the Hispanic chamber was not speaking Spanish at the time. So there was a little disconnect on the Hispanic chamber and the community. So when I started, there were some people that would say, oh, so now the Hispanic chamber does speak Spanish, because I'm fully bilingual. And so I was given more representation to the Hispanic community by showcasing more of the culture. And so going to the culture and the business, so we do events, we'll highlight the culture. At that time, we were doing a lot of the Mexican culture because that's basically most of the community at the time, which is now it's not. It's a very diverse community in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so at that time, we would do an event and would try to do, for example, we did a gala and try to showcase the feeling of the 1950s, with the suits and the culture and the Chicano and the Americano and the Hispanic living in the United States. So it was sort of like a mix, but showcasing the culture, different cultures. Well, my current occupation is director of Casa de la Cultura, and as you mentioned before, I kind of retired from the Hispanic Chamber after I had a stroke, and so because the stress level was too much, and so when I had the stroke, I decided to go ahead and just leave the chamber, so I made the decision to leave the chamber, and then about 3 months later, we started this project with Casa de la Cultura. Even though the project was already there, but it was a sleeping status, when they asked me to revive it, we got a group together, a group of business owners together, and to support the idea. 2018, we managed to get all the paperwork, changed the name of the organization to Casa de la Cultura to make it more inclusive of all the cultures, and we started looking for a place. We finally found one, and we started fixing it, and then of course a pandemic started, and we stopped for about 2.5 years, and then just this past year we started really just going full speed with it, and so we'll have the grand opening here in a few weeks. House of the Culture. Well, you have kids, right?
Yes.
They speak Spanish.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, many families where the kids don't speak Spanish. I know friends that are undocumented. They speak very little English, but their kids don't speak Spanish. So how do they communicate? So the idea of starting Casa de la Cultura is so they can learn where they came from. They learn about the folklorico dance. They learn about the arts. They learn about the music, they learn about the poetry, they learn about the literature, so they can start really practicing and feel proud of speaking Spanish, because all the classes that we give out in there, right now we're giving the art class and guitar class. The instructors are giving the classes in Spanish, and some kids don't even speak Spanish. So we do provide a translator. But we try to give them the class in Spanish so they can start getting the feel of really just enjoying and not feel embarrassed of speaking Spanish, because that's what we see in the young people. The kids, they don't want to speak Spanish, and to me, that is hurting our community, because it's when you grow up with no entity, what do you have? You have nothing, and so when you grow up feeling proud of your heritage, your culture, then you have a past that you can feel proud. And then as you grow older, you're going to showcase that culture with other people. And now with the Hispanic communities being so diverse, with people from Guatemala, people from Honduras, El Salvador, from all over the